Hey everyone, my name is Gavin Manners. Welcome to CODA Open Lab. CODA invited me to share my art process, so I'll be walking you through the creation of a ticket printer that I've designed to fit into my Arctic Metro project. In this 1 hour tutorial, we'll go from initial 2D sketches all the way to a polished asset using a mixed workflow. I'll also share my reference gathering process and how I build hard surface forms while keeping that tactile retro tech feel. Before we dive in, a bit about me. I'm a principal concept artist working for id Software in Dallas, Texas for the past year, and I've been in the games industry for about 8 years now. So let's get started. So I just want to give a bit of an introduction to my Arctic Metro project because that's the environment within which I'm going to be designing. So this is a project that I started a while ago when I was working at Atomhawk, and I just wanted like a sci-fi universe that I could draw these cool sci-fi clunky shapes in, and then in order to give it a little bit more depth, I wanted to put it in a biome. So in this case it's like a frozen kind of Arctic environment to help drive some of the design decisions that I was going to make. So in this instance, because everything's cold and frozen, I would want to have like lots of heating pipes and vents and heaters, and the idea is the energy that powers this whole system and heats everything up and powers the electricity for the metro comes from geothermal energy. So I'm designing all of these assets with that framework in mind. So I want to add to this project because I have done one keyframe, so taking into account all of the things I just talked about, so the station, extracting or using geothermal energy, lots of pipes everywhere, heating things up, and it's just a station that people use to get around the human expansion into the Arctic Circle. So when I was asked to design a prop for an hour-long YouTube tutorial, I felt like this was the perfect project and the perfect set of constraints to design within. So the first thing I do when I start any design is I will come into PureF and start to lay out my thinking and my ideas. So the first thing I want to do with this project before doing anything else is, now that I've decided on the asset that I want to design, is I need to just write some notes and get a clear idea of the vibe that I'm going for, how the object works. So all I've done here is I've given myself a visual representation of the setting that the design is going to take place in. So I've already got like an established theme and a design language that I'm adding into, and I've written some notes here about how I think the device would actually work. So now I've got some information, so I can start going into Pinterest, which is what I use for my reference gathering, and start to see if I can find something interesting. The way that I like to use Pinterest is come to my homepage. So my algorithm just kind of shows me stuff that's already pretty interesting because of the activity that I have on Pinterest. So any number of these ideas I can look at and just kind of get inspired, and sometimes this is a good starting point, but in this instance what I'm going to do is I am going to type in something like that. Very, very obvious, but I just want to be specific, and then because it's Pinterest you'll get a number of different like historical examples. I always find it provides more interesting results than Google or Bing. Something like this, like I've never seen that before. I think that's really interesting. And what I want to do is when I find something interesting, I'm just going to right click on it and press open link in new tab, and then that will go there. So I'm just going to pin my tabs. I'm a bit of a heathen. I use Edge instead of Chrome, so I get vertical tabs because I prefer that. I like this one, so I'm going to open that. I'm going to open this one, and this is pretty cool, so I'm going to open that. And then what that does is
I can go to that tab, and then Pinterest will recommend new references to me based on the existing picture, but I strongly suspect that it also suggests things to me based on my algorithm. So all of this stuff is really interesting, and this is the kind of vibe that I want to go for. So I kind of come to these conclusions based on doing this bit of research, but then also I've already defined my aesthetic and the universe that this needs to go into. So I already have a kind of an idea of what I want to go towards. So what I'm doing when I'm finding something interesting, I'm always just right clicking and opening it in a new tab, and then that will give me a bunch of other things that I can look at. And the only danger here is not to spend too long doing this, because there is such a thing as too many references, and that's just an easy trap to fall into. So I always limit myself at this stage with a certain amount of time, like a hour, something like that, just to really dig into the design. And then also you want to just limit the number of references to like 10 to 20, something like that. You really don't want to have too many references at this stage. And this is the board that I ended up with on Pinterest, and all I'm going to do is transfer these over to PureRef, and then we'll have a look at the PureRef board. And these are the reference images that I gathered, and I found this image of this Polaroid camera, and this became the driver for the whole project. I really like the way that opens up, and it kind of made me want to approach this design as something that is one thing. So it's the ticket machine printer where you type in the information and it comes up on the screen, and then it physically transforms and something opens. So and it then becomes the camera in order to take the photograph of the person buying the ticket. So this was a real driver for the project, and I use this image in the final design. And I take a lot of inspiration from these shapes and the way that it opens, and I wouldn't have found that reference had I not done my initial research on Pinterest, because I was thinking of initially going towards something more like this kind of old school ticket machine, but it ends up being a lot more like this. So it's always worth doing that bit of research first in order to get a good head start on the design thinking. Something else that I add to my reference board, which is also really useful, is artist inspiration. So this is, for me, always in a different category to reference. I want to look at reference for the shapes and the materials, and I can lift details from here and draw them into my design. But in terms of artist reference, I don't want to be taking information and details and design language from these references. This is just for me to get inspired and have a nice benchmark for where I want to push in terms of the level of rendering, and things like Sheng's work is just so inspirational. It helps keep me on track with the project and gives me an idea of what I want to achieve. So having the inspiration here is always useful for me, but I don't want to fall into the trap of copying other people's design language. I want to try and develop my own unique design language based on the references that I've gathered. And sometimes I find it really useful just to distill the project down to something like this. So I've got all these references, and in order to not get lost in my references and not go in the wrong direction, doing something like this just helps me keep in mind, okay, what is this project distilled down to, and what is it that I'm trying to create? So what I think at this stage my project is going to be is, this kind of pop-up Polaroid camera idea, and then combined with this kind of old school ticket machine. So if I ever get lost and I don't know where to go, I'll always just go back to this and go, okay, what is it exactly that I'm trying to achieve? Does my design kind of go back to this original ethos that I've created for myself. And then also, this is some of my other designs, and this is just to keep me on track as to the level of illustration that I'm going for, so that I don't spend too much time pushing it too far. So, and then this is the final board, and that's what I'm going to be working from going forwards. So now, taking my references, I want to start generating some interesting ideas, but I want to do them kind of like low commitment. So what I usually do is I make a low opacity layer like this, just in a Photoshop document, and I'll start scribbling some ideas, anything that comes to mind based on my references. And the more I do these, the more interesting ideas will come out. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of getting the bad ideas out of the way. And at this stage, I'm just trying to generate interesting shapes in interesting ideas, and I'm trying to combine my references together in a way that would create a new design. And these kinds of drawings are very low commitment, and the idea is to just give myself some ammunition for the next stage, so that I'm not going in completely blind when I'm trying to create like the nice drawing. And this is what I end up with. So I've done 3 sheets of sketches, and they took maybe 30 minutes. So it's always really important for me to do this part, and that just kind of ensures that I'm going to have the information, and also just, you know, I'm loosened up enough to move into the next stage, knowing that I've got some good ideas, and knowing that I have a direction that I can go in. Because for me, that's just a lot easier than just trying to draw an amazing idea, an amazing drawing, just, you know, off the top of my head. But no one ever really sees these drawings, so this is just for me. So when I'm on a live project, I won't show this to anybody. This is just for me to get some ideas together, start thinking about what the design could actually be, start thinking about how it could actually work and move, and then I can either clean these up and create a design sketch from them. But what we're going to do next is take these into do a rough 3D block out, and then kind of use that as a way to develop the design. So the next thing to do is I'm going to go into Blender, and I'm creating some really, really basic geometric shapes in order to explore and kind of flesh out those really rough sketches that I was doing. So what I'm doing here is in really, really simply, I'm exploring shapes, and I'm thinking about the configuration, and I'm thinking about the proportions, and I'm just trying to create something a little bit more solid. And, you know, talking about the references that I found, and I want to kind of explore this idea of this object transforming, or like opening, or, you know, having 2 different modes. So what I'm doing at this stage is I'm kind of just really, really simply exploring how that could happen. So, you know, I do a few of these designs. I don't take all of them forwards, but this is a good way for me to just explore what the design could potentially be in 3D space. And, you know, this is something that you can also do sketching, but with something like this, I knew that I was going to be drawing this from a couple of different angles, and it was just easier for me to figure this stuff out in 3D. And it was a very quick process. And as you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm screenshotting the open state and the closed state of 4 of these designs. So I've picked 4 that I think could be interesting that I'm going to develop, and I'm just using the Windows snipping tool, which is Shift Windows S, and I'm just getting a screen capture and just dragging that straight into Photoshop, and that is going to give me a good basis to start designing on top of. So one thing I'm being careful of here, I haven't set any cameras up because I'm kind of just doing this a bit quick and dirty. So I'm just trying to move my shapes around there and get the second state of the design figured out without moving the viewport, because I want the open and closed state to be taken from the same angle. So I've just put all of those screenshots into a folder in Photoshop and lowered the opacity down. I want the opacity low enough so that the 3D is enough of a guide for me to sketch over the top of, but I don't want those hard 3D lines interfering with my design thinking. And this is why I'm doing a really, really rough sketch over the top, because I can go in and start doing clean line work over the top of the 3D, but what I like about doing this quick, rough sketch over the top of the 3D is I'm almost pushing back the hard edges of the 3D, because what can happen when you use a 3D underlay is it can kind of stifle your design thinking if you become too wedded to the 3D underneath. So I'm making an effort here to push outside of the bounds of the 3D while still adhering to the rough proportions and the general design idea that I came up with the ideation sketches and with the 3D model, but I'm not letting that constrain me, and I'm still using this stage to explore ideas and really understand what each of these 4 designs could be. So as you can see there, I'm also doing this rough sketching stage on a 20% opacity layer, and the reason I do that is I'm almost sort of sneaking up on the design. I want things to be very loose and very light, and I find that when I try and do this with a really solid black line, I feel like it becomes too stark and everything it feels a bit too permanent. So lowering the opacity right down like this, it just enables me to be a bit sort of freer and a bit looser with the lines that I'm making, so that I'm not so sort of precious about the things that I'm drawing. So in terms of design, this is the main period of like real design thinking. So I've got my rough ideas, and I've kind of explored what that might look like in 3D just to get like a rough base to draw over. But this is the time where I'm just figuring out exactly what these designs are and what they look like. So the next stage after this, where I do clean line work over the top of these designs, that's not as important as this stage. So I've sped this up about 5 times. So, but I've included the whole of this period because I think in terms of design thinking, I find this is the crucial stage, because everything that comes after this, as long as you've got like good design foundations and the design is reading well and feeling good at this stage, then everything that comes after is just refining the design and making it presentable. So you'll see me doing a lot of erasing here and like redrawing lines and trying different shapes out, and again trying not to be too wedded to the 3D underneath, still kind of adhering to that rough design idea that I had earlier on, but still kind of push the idea and explore different shapes. And I'm also keeping in mind how this thing is going to transform or open up or become the camera. And I'm also trying to keep in mind that I want each of these designs to feel different. So it's I'm solving the same problem, but I want to show 4 different approaches to the same design problem. And especially when I'm working on a live project, I'm always trying to show different ideas. Just it's the way I see it is just, you're just kind of adding value. And a lot of the time you can provide like a wild card idea that's totally unusual, and you don't think anybody's going to pick that, but sometimes it has been the case that the wild card idea is the one that gets picked. So it's always worth providing different approaches to the same design problem. So You see the third design on the page there is, it's completely different to the others, and I'm imagining that the machine is operated by these kind of handles on either side, kind of like the Blade Runner memory creation tool thing. So just thinking about the ergonomics and how this thing is going to be used, and trying to push it in a different direction to the other ones. So whilst I'm doing all of this, I'm trying to keep in mind my design fundamentals. So loosely adhering to things like the 70-30 rule, and my areas of rest and my areas of detail, and just dividing things up in a visually pleasing way. I wasn't trained officially in concept art. Like, I never went to university or school or anything to do it. I'm self-taught, but I've kind of just picked up over time things that look good and things that don't look good. So this is why you see me trying things out and erasing lines and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't work. Because I think especially at this stage, the lines that I'm creating are so throwaway, and this stage is so quick that it's not a problem for me to just try things out and move things around. And you see there, sometimes I'll lasso certain areas and move them around just to get them feeling right. And it's all part of this messy initial process. And you saw there that I wasn't feeling that design at all, so I've just completely deleted it. And this is something else that I normally do, is when I'm struggling with one thing, I'll just move on to something else. So, and so I've given up on that, and I'm going back to the fourth design. So I know that I need to solve these design problems, but sometimes it just takes a little bit more loosening up. So I will address the problems and draw the things that I know that I can do, and then by the time I've done that and I've loosened up and I've got a couple of designs on the page that I'm happy with, then I can go back and tackle the problems that I was having trouble with, and more often than not, I'm able to approach them in a different way. So it's all a case of loosening up, and that's what this whole process is. So I call it adding resolution. But what essentially what it is broad strokes. So I'm almost like creeping up on the design, and I'm starting off very loosely, very non-committal, with very, very quick drawings, and then building up my understanding of what I want the design to be, and building up my confidence. And I'm also loosening up and getting the bad ideas out of the way. And by going through that process, I'm able to come to a design that I'm much, much happier with had I just sat down and started drawing something. Because I know some people are really able to just sit down and draw something amazing and come up with fantastic designs just without any of this preparation that I do. But I am not able to do that very often. So if I'm on a live project and if I have a brief to respond to get the best result, I will generally do this preparation work so that I know I'm coming to the best conclusion, and I'm producing the best design with a lot of thought, and I'm taking the time to to make sure this thing is going to work, and it feels like it is real, and it's created from actual materials rather than just drawing the first thing that comes to my head. So this is just my process that I've worked out over the years, and it works really, really well for me. So it's just this idea of just creeping up on the design and being very non-committal until you're not non-committal, until you know what you're doing, and then you can just go straight for it and make a really, really nice drawing. So you'll see me flipping the canvas quite a lot as well. That's just so I can get the correct lines from the correct angle. So the way that I use my pen, I'm strongest making the brush stroke from one direction. So I've just gotten used to flipping the canvas every time I need to make a difficult line. I know some people actually use the rotate tool in Photoshop and make lines that way. I very rarely do that, but I find this is the best way for me to make the lines that I need. And also seeing the design from the other way around helps you see it with fresh eyes as well. And I know that's a very, very old trick, but being able to flip the canvas like that really, really helps me see things properly and see mistakes, and you're able to see the design from a different perspective almost. And also, when you've been looking at things for too long, sometimes you can't see the mistakes, or you can't see when something doesn't look quite right. So flipping the canvas also really helps with that too. This particular stage only took, I think, about an hour and 15 minutes. So again, just that I'm emphasizing speed and looseness, and I'm trying to be really non-committal with these. So if something isn't going in the right direction, then I haven't wasted a ton of time doing a really, really detailed drawing of a design that isn't good. So but in later stages, when I'm spending a lot longer making the refined line work, sometimes it can be very easy to forget to zoom out and just make sure the whole design is working well. But at this stage, you can see I'm not zooming in. I'm not physically zooming into the canvas very much, and I'm trying to keep a distance, and I'm trying not to be too precious about my lines, and I'm trying to just get the shapes down and make sure that I've got enough on the page that I can then create the clean line work in the next stage. And I think this is probably the third attempt at this design, and I end up quite liking this one. And it came a close second. I was going to develop this one, but I decided to choose the second design instead. But it paid to not be too precious about what I had already done. And you can see I've erased that design 3 times now, or twice, and now this is the third iteration. So just being willing to completely delete things and start again, and just push things to get to the right solution, rather than being super precious and spending hours and hours on a drawing and then it not being right, and then being afraid to throw it away or being afraid to change it. So this is why I do these very, very quick, very scribbly drawings when I'm designing something like this. And I'm designing props here, but this is the same process that I would go through if I was going to be designing like a mech or a vehicle or something like that. What I like about props is the fact that you have to get really down into the details, and you can't really hide behind loose brush strokes or kind of hiding things in shadow. It has to function, it has to look like it's made of something, and I just really like solving those problems and making it feel like a real tactile object. So with mechs and vehicles, you can kind of get away with indicating some of those details, whereas with props you have to really think about it. So I'm coming to the end of this stage, and another thing that I find important to keep in mind is just finding a good stopping point. So I'm kind of noodling away here a little bit, and changing things and tweaking things, just because I want to have things ready for the next stage. But it's important to be able to find a stopping point, and just keep things moving and not get too hung up on one particular stage. So I'm just making the canvas a little bit bigger here at the moment. I'm just laying things out in a better way. And what I did there was I just used the find edges filter, just because I don't want those grey blocks underneath my drawings anymore, but I still want to use the guide underneath as a perspective guide. So I've just used find edges, and then I've set them to a multiply layer, and I also desaturated that layer as well so that I don't have the colors coming through. And then lower the opacity of everything, and same as before, I'm just adding resolution to the design, and using my underlay and my loose design ideas, I'm now able to create a clean line work over the top, and add resolution and increase my understanding of what these designs are. And because I've done all of the work previously, I'm able to come up with good shapes, and keeping to the design methodology that I came up with at the beginning of the process. So making sure to refer back to my references. Some of these shapes is just my visual language, so my visual library that I've got in my head. But I'm also trying not to forget to look back at my references, and I really make sure I encapsulate those shapes and that design style. You can see me sort of cutting ahead a little bit here, so we're going to focus on this design here, but you'll see the other designs kind of take shape around this one. And it's the same as I said before. When I come to a certain point with a design, I'll just move on to another design, and then let that take shape. And then when I come to a sticking point, then I'll move on to another design. But what I'm showing you here is I'm just showing you the progression of this main design, and that's the one that I end up developing. And this part of the process was about 3.5 hours, and it's literally just me doing clean line work. So all of the design decisions are pretty much done, and what I'm doing here is I'm just cleaning up the design, so I'm able to present it and communicate the design properly. So it's not super valuable for me to show you that entire process, and you can just see me working away at this one design. So what I'm doing here is, because I've taken the screenshots from Blender at the same angle for the open and closed state, it means I can reuse some of the drawing when I'm figuring out what that open state looks like, and it just saves a little bit of time and helps me start to figure out how this thing would open up. And it's really fun figuring out mechanisms and how stuff works and how stuff's kind of put together. When I'm designing, I'm always thinking about how the object would be built and manufactured. So something like placing screws in the right place and thinking about how the thing would come apart, and placement of panel lines, and all of I want all of that to feel realistic and to feel like it's an actual object that could exist in the real world. So paying attention to things like that is really important. And anytime I get lost and I'm not quite sure what something looks like, I'll be referring to my PureF board and stealing shapes and kind of filling in the gaps in my knowledge using the information in my reference board. So I'm just about coming to the end of the sketching process. So I've got a clear idea of what my designs are, and I've got enough information to make a decision as to which design to develop to go into the next stage. So I'm just going to do a quick bit of presentation. So I always create a grey tone underneath my line work because I feel like it helps pop the designs off the page, and it also gives you a clipping mask in order to be able to add things like values and shadows. And that's what I'm going to do to these sketches. They're grayscale at the moment, but when I present the final images, I have the masks available there to just put a quick bit of color on them. And these kinds of sketches, I always like to put shadow on them, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on when I color the final design. But I feel like just adding a quick multiply layer over the top of the grayscale values really helps push the three-dimensionality of the design, and it helps the design read better. And I am speeding through this process, so you're not seeing the whole process, but it is just as simple as creating block colors over a clipping mask, and now I've got my multiply layer, and I've got a hard brush that's set to opacity for the pen pressure, and I'm just loosely defining my light direction. And I generally always put my shadow side on the short side of the object, and the reason I'm making decisions like that is I'm just thinking what light direction will make the design show in the best way possible. So it's not very good to have the whole thing cast in shadow, and it's not good to have the whole thing completely bright, because it will become difficult to read the forms. So it may change per design, but a general rule is I'm putting the shadows on the short side of the 3/4. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back into Blender, because I've selected my design that I want to develop. And now, in order to communicate that design effectively, I need to show it from a couple of different angles. So I'm just using the Blockout that I had before, and I'm just kind of adding a little bit of detail to it, just so I've got a base to draw over. So what this is for is I want to show, well, first of all, I'm just exploring a little bit more how the thing opens and how the different parts would move. And, that's not necessarily for me to draw over, but that's just for me to understand the design a bit better. But what I am going to do is I'm going to use this model and turn it over and screen capture in the way that I did before, and use that to draw the back view, because it's quite a detailed prop. If I'm going to pass this to somebody to 3D model, they're going to want a front view and a back view and kind of a breakout of how the thing opens. So and there's lots of nice details and lots of nice design opportunities on the back of the device. So just to speed things along a bit, and also to help my understanding of the design, I'm just making this really rough 3D block out, and I'm going to draw over it to get my back view. And what I'm doing here is I'm just exploring how the camera part opens, and just making sure the pivot is going to be in the right place, and just making sure that everything kind of makes sense. It's not a super detailed 3D model, but at this stage, this is kind of all I need just to test out my idea of the mechanics of the object. And I find just jumping into Blender and doing something like this for a few minutes, it really, really helps my confidence in my design, and it helps me kind of move forwards knowing that everything works as intended. Because it's the worst thing when you hand off a design to a 3D modeler and then it turns out that there's clipping, or something doesn't work properly, or there's something that you haven't quite thought out. So I'm always trying to avoid situations like that. So here's the screenshot in Blender, and I've gone straight in and I've used the Find Edges filter. And using my previous drawings as an underlay, I'm going to go through the exact same process and continue the process of adding resolution to my understanding of the design. So these drawings are bigger and the resolution is higher. I think this is about 6,000 pixels across now. So I'm using the same brush size. I always use brush size 10 or 15, and that just gives me enough bandwidth in the brush in order to get my thick lines and my thin lines. And I'm just going round and I'm really sharpening up all of these details, and really going into detail about the way that the forms transition and the way that the materials fit together. Well, not the materials at this stage, but the different segments of the panels, and the inner workings and the outer workings, and how the buttons fit in. So because I've got a good basis to work from because of the design work that I did before this, this process is really I'm not going to say easy, but it's a very fluid process now because I understand the design, I understand where I want to go, I understand how it works, and I understand what everything looks like. So now it's just a case of sitting back and spending some time and just getting a really nice clean drawing out and just making it look really, really good. And the idea of this is to communicate to the person who's going to be modeling this asset what it's supposed to look like and how it works and the colors and the materiality, and so they've got enough information to model it and get it in the game. So again, just as before, this is a really simple process of me just cleaning up my line work and adding line weights to emphasize certain surfaces and adding transition lines to describe my forms. So I'm cutting certain parts out and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this stage of the process was about 3 hours. So it really is just a case of kind of getting in the zone and just working my way around the design and just filling in the gaps and kind of just making everything read correctly. And because I'm working at a larger resolution and a larger scale, it means I'm able to really pay attention to all these little details like screws and fixings and buttons, and just to really sell the idea that this is like a real world prop and it's going to be something that somebody carries around with them to use on a daily basis. And as mentioned previously, if I'm not sure what something looks like, or there's a bit of a gap in my understanding of what the design should be, I'm always referring back to my references as a way of filling in the gaps and informing what the area needs to look like. So there shouldn't really ever be a point at this stage where I'm getting stuck and I'm not sure what to draw, because I should have all of the information that I need to just fill in the gaps and make the design cohesive. So now that I've got the finished sketches, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before and just quickly paint my grey block tone underneath the drawings, and I use that to create a new layer at multiply, and the multiply layer is at 100%, but I've got it at about a grey 3 maybe. Just making sure the shadows aren't too strong, and I'm just going to go round and loosely block in all of my shadows, and then go round with a thin brush after I've kind of got my broad strokes, and then refine the shadows to bring out all of the areas. And it's a relatively quick process, and I've just gotten used to doing this every single time now. I really think it helps the design read, and I think it just helps communicate the forms of the design in a better way than if it was just flat color. That's my preference anyway. And the other thing that's useful is once I've done it, I just have this layer now, and everything that I do after this, so the values and the colors, the extra lighting that I'm going to do, that will all go underneath this layer, and I can even change the color of the shadows later on as well. So for the most part, I always like to work non-destructively, so I'll keep everything like this on separate layers, because depending on what it looks like when I come to the end of the colouring process, I'll want to tweak things and change things and make shifts to the values and things just to get everything reading properly. So now that's done, what I'm going to do is start adding in my local value. So just adhering to my 70-30 rule and areas of detail, areas of rest, I'm using those kind of proportional ideas to break up the design in terms of values as well. So I want the large proportion of this design to be like a one color, and then I'm going to want maybe like 20 or 30% of the proportion of the rest of the design to be like a darker color or a darker value, and that's just to help break the read of the design up. So typically in this instance, and it's kind of a general rule, you don't have to adhere to it religiously, but typically I'm gonna be painting my mechanical kind of internal areas of detail. I'm going to be painting those in the darker value and helping my panels and my my lighter value areas of rest. I want to help those pop out. You can, of course, do the inverse and potentially make the areas of detail like a lighter value and make the casing a darker value. But in this instance, this is just what works with the already established color scheme that I've got for my project. So that's what I've gone with. So the next thing I want to do is just imply a bit of materiality to the design. So I just want to show that there's some reflectivity and just give an indication of the kind of material that this thing's made out of. So the way I've done that is, and again, this is all grayscale. I'm going to add color later, but I like to get all the lighting and values done before I start adding color. I've just added a screen layer, and I'm brightening up the surfaces that would be reflecting the light source. I'm kind of just guessing here based on experience, but where I actually started learning how to render surfaces is Scott Robertson's How to Render book. It's very in-depth, and as a resource for understanding how light works and how materials work and how different materials respond to lighting. It's a really invaluable resource, so I'd really recommend picking it up. And then once that's finished, I'm going to create a new layer on top and set it to color dodge, and I'm going to use a small soft brush to add specular highlights. So these are the points on the surface that the actual light source is being reflected in the radius of the surface. So, and this helps just really pop out the curves and just helps show the shininess of the material, because it's going to be like a shiny sort of satiny painted plastic. So and obviously if it was matte, I wouldn't do this stage because there wouldn't be a harsh specular highlight, but that's all related to material properties and things like that, which I'm not going to go over in this tutorial because this is more of a design tutorial, but that sort of thing really helps sell the design. So it's really important to understand lighting and materials and how things look and how things sort of react to lighting and reflections and things like that in the real world. So now that that's all done, so I've got my lighting, I've got my shadows, I've got my reflectivity, I've got my local values. Now's the time when I can start thinking about color, and because I've got all of my layers set up separately and I've got all my masks properly set up, I can paint in my colors and start experimenting with what I actually want this thing to look like. So this blue that I've got here is very bright and it's very desaturated, so it's not actually right for what I want, but because it's on a separate layer, I can then start playing around with hue saturation and color balance just to get the exact right tone that I want. And I'm not particularly good with things like color, selecting color. I can kind of tell if something looks right or not, but in terms of actually selecting colors, it is really helpful for me to have things on separate layers so I can play around with them and experiment a little bit just to get it exactly right. And I want a bit of sort of graphical treatment on this as well, just to really get it feeling like this sort of corporate branded object. And I don't want to overcomplicate it too much, but I'm just thinking how I can divide the color scheme up just to get some interesting shapes on there maybe, but also not make it too over the top so it detracts from the rest of the design. And I also don't want to divide it up into 50-50. So, really falling back on things like, really falling back on the 70-30 rule, like I mentioned earlier, just to understand what proportion of the color scheme I want to make white and what proportion needs to be blue. And again, because it's all on separate layers, I can really just spend time playing around with it and making sure it looks right and experimenting and trying things out. So I think this white is looking a little bit too kind of clean and bright here. So I'm just finding like an off-white tone that works a little bit better with the blue. So typically, just thinking about color theory, I'm choosing something that's a little bit more yellow and a little bit more orange, just to offset the cool tones of the blue. And I've also made the gray slightly warmer as well, just to get that color balance feeling a little bit better. And I'm also experimenting here with just dulling down some of those shine highlights, because I feel like maybe they're a little bit too strong in certain areas. And I want to show that the ID card thing that slots in the side isn't part of the actual design. So I am going to need to do a drawing that shows how the ID card kind of slots in and out, which isn't shown here just yet. I still need to do that, but I wanted to show that that's a separate part. So I've done that in a darker value. When I've actually designed that, what I'll do is I'll indicate that is different in terms of like the color or the design language, or there'll be like a detail or a sticker on it or something, just to kind of help separate it out a little bit. Just in terms of theming, I felt like it needed a bit of the design needed a bit of a lift in terms of like a pop color. So I'm just picking out certain elements just to highlight in this yellow color, because I just to really emphasize this kind of chunky, commercial, plasticky sort of manufacturing design language that I'm going for. So I think just highlighting some of these important buttons in this yellow color, I feel like that helps really lift the design. So another thing that I think really helps sell designs like this are little markings and little labels and little decals. So again, on a separate layer here underneath all of the lighting and shadow information, I'm just going to experiment really loosely and just start sketching out ideas for some decals and where they could go. And I think it really helps sell the believability of that this is like a real object, and it's going to have warning stickers on it or manufacturing stickers. It's going to have like a model number on it, and it's going to have like a sticker on the back about its like manufacturing information, all that kind of stuff. So I'm loosely sketching that in now, and I'm loosely writing in where I want labels to be and what they could potentially say. And then what I can do after that is actually, when I think this looks good from a distance and the labels are saying all the right things and I feel like it's got the right vibe, then I can go in and tidy those up and actually type those out. And then one of the last really important lighting steps that I like to do, and I'll generally do this after I've done everything else, although I still need to write these labels, which I'll do in a second. I feel like it's really important to add like a rim light, and what that does is it really helps pop the design off the page, and it really helps sell the silhouette of the design. So you'll see it in like product photography and things like that, and those are good places to look for references as to how these sorts of things should look. But by just adding like a light, I'm imagining the light is kind of behind and to the side of the object, and it's just kind of shining light around the edges of the design. And I'm just choosing strategically where to put these highlights to show the curves and the edges and really crisp up the edges of the design. And I really think it helps bring the page to life. So especially something like this, I think adding a rim light is really, really helpful. And again, it's just a normal hard brush with pressure set to opacity. And what I'm doing is I'm erasing the the edge out to get the softness if I need it, and that's just a normal soft eraser. And now what I'm doing is, I feel like the design is, this is very, very sort of picky, finicky stuff. This isn't really necessary, but it seemed to me like the design was reading quite flat. And as I'm imagining the light source coming from the top, I sort of want the top of the image to be a little bit brighter and the bottom to be a little bit darker. So I've added a screen layer on the top of everything, just underneath the line work, and added a bit of soft light coming from the top. And then I've done the same from below with a multiply layer, and it just helps remove that flatness from the drawing. It's very, very subtle, but I think it really helped lift the design. And now what I'm doing as a very, very last thing is I'm just typing out the warning labels and just replacing the scribbly ones that I did earlier, just to sharpen everything up a little bit. And then I obviously need to go around on that decal layer and erase out the scribbliness underneath. I bought this graphics set. I'm not very good at graphics design, so anything like this I'll just kind of buy an asset pack off ArtStation or something. And you know, I think I really like these kind of manufacturer labels that go on the back of products, and so I bought a set that has all of these interesting graphics on, and I've just, rather than design something myself, I've just used one of these or a couple of these presets just to quickly add something in, just to give the feel and the vibe of what I'm going for. And then I've also used one of the graphics as well to create a screen graphic. So what I'm displaying on the screen here is what would be printed out on the sticker, and along with the grainy picture of the customer's face. And so here's the final design. I just want to talk a little bit about presentation. I've changed the background color to like a lighter gray. I felt like the black was maybe a little bit too strong. And what I also like to do is add some framing elements to some of the elements on the page as well, just to kind of help hold them in place. And then I always think it kind of helps illustrate the idea if you've got like some arrows and some text just kind of showing what the device is and how to use it. I'm not particularly good at drawing people, but I felt like it would be useful in this instance just to show like how the conductor is meant to carry this around on his shoulder on the strap, and then just a little diagram there to show that you're supposed to take a photo of the customer in order to print their face on the ticket. I'm not super fantastic at presentation, but this sort of thing does the trick, and I don't want to overcomplicate things, and I like to let the design speak for itself. So with that, I think we're finished. Thanks CODA for giving me the opportunity to work on this prop design together. Subscribe to their channel for other tutorials and follow them on Instagram, ArtStation and X. You can also find me on all those platforms. All of those links are in the description. I do have a YouTube channel where I post the trailers for my Gumroad tutorials, so go and check that out as well. And thank you very much again, and I'll see you in the next one.